Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Kari and today I'm doing my January wrap-up. Miraculously, and I do mean miraculously, I read 21 books in January. Don't ask me how I did it because I cannot explain it and I don't know what happened. But here we are. I finally, for the first time in I think about a year, met a TBR. I read every book on my January TBR and then about 10 more. So let's get into it. So I read 3 on audiobook, the first one being The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. This is a story about a scientist who is banned from doing what he wants, which is vivisections or live dissections in London, and he ends up on an island somewhere. I'm not entirely sure where. I kind of picture it in the Falklands, but I could be very, very wrong about the location. Either way, he ends up on an island and transforms animals such as orangutans and pumas into what pass for humans. It's a horrifyingly cruel process, but one that he seems to enjoy for evolutionary purposes or something nonsensical like that. Predominantly, I read this book because I wanted to know the backstory behind Catherine, who is one of the characters in The Adventures of the Athena Club by Theodore Goss, which I love. Such a good trilogy. But I read this one on audiobook. It was about 3 hours, and so when I went up to Duluth one of the weekends in January, it worked perfectly to read on the way up there. One of the other audiobooks I read was Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. And strictly speaking, I didn't read Peter Pan, I read the Audible original version. So it was one of those, I'm gonna call it a radio show, basically, where they don't read the book word for word, but they have all of the dialect and the noises and stuff, so you still get all of it. I did enjoy it. Oh yes, The Island of Dr. Moreau, by the way, I gave 3 stars. Because it was weird and it was short and I wasn't always sure what was happening. But back to Peter Pan. I also gave this one 3 stars because I think they did a good job with the radio show part of it. And I enjoyed that it was darker than the Disney movie, although most adaptations that Disney does are originally darker. It just wasn't really something that I enjoyed all that much. And then the third one I read on audiobook was Twain's Feast by Andrew Beers, and this was again an adaptation of a book, not the strict book, talking about these 8 specific dishes that Twain had listed as this great welcome home feast, apparently, and the people in the book, it's more of a discussion really about the book. Anyway, they ate these 8 specific dishes, or as close as they could get to these 8 specific dishes. I did find that interesting. I gave this one 3 stars as well because it was one of those where I wanted more about the dishes themselves. I appreciated that they talked about the backstory. Apparently they ate raccoon, and so there was discussion about how coon is a racist, derogatory term and how that came about and why it is and how it's still used and all that kind of stuff, which I found fascinating, but I did want more about the actual food and the preparation of it, which I didn't really get. Then we have Rise of the Necrofauna by Britt Ray. There is a book review coming out on this, so I will just tell you to watch out for that, but this one I gave 5 out of 5 stars. It is about de-extinction. Basically, can we bring back animals that have gone extinct like the woolly mammoth or the passenger pigeon, and more importantly, should we? What would the ramifications be? I really enjoyed this book. It discussed science, but it made it pretty accessible and explained a lot of it and what the impacts would be. The one thing I guess I had a bit of a problem with was that it didn't really go into the legal ramifications because there's not law on it yet. However, I do understand that there isn't law on it yet, so we don't know what the ramifications are. Then I read Sex and the Sea by Mara J. Hart, which also a book review coming out on that, so I will just tell you to watch out for that. It should be coming whatever the next posting day is, either Wednesday or Sunday, after Rise of the Necrofauna goes up. But this one is a book about the various sexual mating rituals, or sexual rituals, there we go, of various species in the sea. She talks about blue whales, horseshoe crabs, abalone, snails, groupers, sharks, dolphins, all of them. It was fantastic. It was incredibly cheeky and brilliant and accessible, and I loved it. Then I read The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater because I decided it was just time to try this series. This is a series about 4 boys and a girl named Blue who are going on a quest in Virginia to find a dead Welsh king named Owen Glendower. I did enjoy the first book. I think I gave it 4 stars? 3 stars, okay. I gave it 3 stars. I think largely because it felt like the pacing was a little bit off. And I think maybe also I was expecting so much with all the hype that's around this series, and I didn't get that level. However, like I said, I did enjoy this book. I think the writing was good. I think it was a fun book, but I mean, it was fun enough that I'm continuing the series. It just wasn't quite up to par with what I expected. I also read Elizabeth I in the Spanish Armada by Colin Hinson, which was a graphic novel giving the briefest of overviews of the attempted invasion by the Spanish Armada of England in 1588. It was fine. I think I gave it 3 stars, maybe 2.5, because it was fine, it was competent, but it was bland and overly superficial. Then I read Nature's Mutiny by Philip Blom, which was a nonfiction book, also from the library, that talks about the Ice Age of the late 16th and 17th centuries. This was fascinating. I gave it, I think, 3.5 stars because I wanted more about the weather patterns themselves. He did a great job of discussing all the ramifications and consequences of the Little Ice Age, the famines, and how that changed agriculture, how it started making cities expand and started industrializing a lot of places, and how it changed the governmental systems even from the strictly feudal models to, I mean, not a democracy or a republic, but it nudged them pretty hard in that direction. And I found that really fascinating, but like I said, I would have liked more about the weather patterns themselves. Then we get into the books that I own, starting with The Pelican Brief by John Grisham. This was actually the first book I read in January. This is a book about the assassinations of several Supreme Court justices set in the 1980s, 90s. And a law student named Darby has this theory. It's very out there, but she has this theory, and she reduces it to writing, and it gets called The Pelican Brief, and as it gets passed around, people realize that this is actually a thing, and problems arise. I did actually enjoy this book. I think I gave it a 4. It's very dated. I think it does a good job of showing what life was like for a woman, and particularly a woman in law school at the time. I was not comfortable with the relationship between her and her professor. I think that is weird, and I don't like it, but I recognize that it's common. Doesn't mean I have to like it. I think he's a good writer. I enjoyed the mystery of it. There wasn't much of the actual law part of it, which I expected more of. I don't know. It was a good book. It was very well written. It was a good page turner. I don't know that I agree that it's one of his best books, but to be fair, I've also only read 2. So I could be completely wrong and this is one of his best books, in which case I read much better books than him, but not the point. It is an enjoyable book. It's just not quite what I was anticipating. Next we have North in the World by Rolf Jacobson, translated by Roger Greenwald. This is a selection of Norwegian poems written by Rolf Jacobson, who was Norwegian. And the part of this book that I love is that it has the Norwegian and then the English. So while I cannot pronounce more than about 2 words in Norwegian, and certainly not understand more than about 5, I really enjoyed trying to connect them, the words in Norwegian and English. And his poems are very interesting. He was writing from I want to say 30 to okay, he was alive from 1907 to 1994, so yeah. He would have been writing from about 1930 to 1994 for all I know. But they also show they have the dates on the poems, and so they show them as they progress through his life, which I thought was really fascinating because you see him go through his wife's death and the industrialization and the technologicalization, which again, not a word but not the point, of Norway and of his home, and that was really interesting. I believe I gave that one 5 stars. Next we have The Guinevere Deception by Kiersten White, which I absolutely gave 5 stars. It is amazing. This is an Arthur retelling, but Guinevere is sent to protect Arthur rather than just to be a figurehead queen. I loved this book. I adore Arthur retellings in basically any form. I was a little bit nervous about this one because Kiersten White is hit or miss for a lot of people. I don't know that I've actually read anything by her. I think this is my first book, but oh my goodness, so good. The magic system is great, the characters are fantastic, the relationship is perfect, and I think we're gonna get some female-female romance in the next one. And I won't say any more than that, but I'm so excited about who it is, and oh my goodness. Then I read Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I finished this when I was in Wisconsin over Martin Luther King weekend with my family because I wanted to read this before I saw the movie, and I did. This is a story about 4 women in Civil War era New England. I almost said New York, that's not right. There was a lot less about the war than I expected, except that their father is away fighting the war for a little bit and then he gets sick. But it was very interesting to watch each of the young women come to terms with what they wanted to do in the start of the book, what they dreamed that they could, even though they were women, to what they changed their dreams to and maybe settled. I have to say I'm not sure I'm thrilled with the fact that Jo got married. I mean, I get it given the time period of the book, but it felt like a very abrupt turnaround for her to just go from I will never get married, I can support myself, thank you, to oh yeah, let's marry this nice German man. I mean, fine, but that was the biggest problem I had with this book. So I think I gave it a 4 stars. However, the movie did a very good job of adapting it. Next I read Girls of Storm and Shadow by Natasha Nhan. This is the second in a series, it is definitely a series, that started with Girls of Paper and Fire. This follows our, I really have a problem remembering main characters' names. Lei. L-E-I. Lei. This follows our main character after she has left the palace. There's a lot of politics, there is a lot more violence. I like how the author dealt with the aftermath of sexual assault. So trigger warning, sexual assault, and definitely some PTSD happening in the first book and this one. I think it was slower paced. I think I ended up giving it about 4. But I also really loved how the relationship developed. I think that was my favorite part about this book because it didn't just gloss over the events of the first book and assume that the relationship was going to prosper and be happy and nothing else was gonna go wrong. It deals with the hard choices that people make when something catastrophic has happened in your world and what you do and how it affects your significant other. I really, really liked that about this book. So if you were looking for a good romance series, I mean, yes, it's fantasy and it's not romance, but the romance does prominently feature. This is definitely the series, as long as you were okay with sexual assault and PTSD. I read Sam Houston and the Alamo Avengers by Brian Kilmeade and Alamo All-Stars by Nathan Hale. And I hold these up together because I read them the same night so that I could compare them. Alamo All-Stars is a graphic novel by Nathan Hale, and I love his style of illustration and his writing. It's sarcastic and hilarious, and it's great. There is a lot going on in this book, and I love it. This one I read so that I had a deeper background than what a graphic novel can give me. So, as you may have noticed, this one says the Texas victory that changed American history. Let me just tell you, they only think it's a victory in Texas. They lost badly. But I gave Alamo All-Stars, I think 5 stars, and I think I gave Sam Houston 3.5 stars because it didn't focus on the Alamo as much as I expected it to. It did focus on Sam Houston, which makes sense because it's a book about Sam Houston, but it didn't focus quite as much on the Alamo as I expected for a book that's allegedly about the Alamo. It gave an overview of, I think, almost the entire Texas Revolution. But that said, I will be doing a video talking about the Alamo because it just sounds fun, for one, and for two, and more importantly, I didn't know anything about the Alamo, and so I feel the need to correct several of the things I have said in past videos when talking about wanting to read this book. And I think the best way for me to do that is to make a video talking about these books specifically and the misconceptions or the misstatements that I've made in the past. Next we have We Rule the Night by Claire Eliza Bartlett, which is a YA fantasy based on the, I believe they were called Night Witches, which are the Russian female pilots in World War II. They were amazing. I did like this book. I think I gave it a 3.5 because I liked that aspect of it, but it did feel rushed and a little bit undeveloped. Like the magic wasn't fully figured out. The world wasn't all there. But I did ultimately like the book, hence the 3.5. I think the writing was good. I think the rest of it was good. The relationships were really interesting. Also read Warstorm by Victoria Aveyard, which I definitely gave 3 stars because it's a good conclusion to a series, but I'm really sick of the romance in this. I liked that it didn't end with them happily married, but it just, this book felt entirely too long for what it was meant to be. Then I read Damsel by Alana Arnold. I will be doing a review on this book because boy is it something. I gave it 4 stars, and basically it is a damsel kidnapped by a dragon reworking. That's all I'm gonna say until I do the video. I reread Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling. Felt like time to do this, talk about it a bit in my February wrap-up, TBR, sorry. So I gave this one 4 stars because it is definitely shorter and feels very much like world building, but I still really like the characters, and though the pacing feels a little bit off, it's a good book and I enjoy it. And then lastly we have The Dream Thieves by Maggie Stiefvater, which is the second in her Raven Cycle series. This follows Ronan, more specifically, who is one of the 4 boys in the series. I gave this one 3 stars because it wasn't my favorite of the series so far, but it was good, it was fine. I liked how they discussed darker topics a little bit, but like I said, it felt much slower than the first one. I realized the ending got a bit rushed, but I also recognized that this video is going to be really long if I don't, so I hope you enjoyed. If you've read any of these, let me know down in the comments, and I will see you in my next video.